largest ever cruise missile, codenamed Flamingo, a weapon designed to strike deep inside the enemy lines.
What happens when a 1-ton warhead learns to fly 3,000 kilometers, threads through gaps in Russia's air defenses, and lands within a living room's distance of the intended target? You get a new kind of quiet on the battlefield, the kind that arrives right before something very loud. Today, we're talking about Ukraine's brand new long-range cruise missile. It's ground-launched, it's domestically built, and yes, it's nicknamed Flamingo. Not because it's graceful, though it is, but because the first prototypes came out of the factory an unfortunate shade of pink. That's right, the missile that could redraw the war's map shares a name with a lawn ornament. History has a sense of humor, but behind the meme is a hard truth. Ukraine has spent years reverse engineering the war it was given, a fight against a larger opponent with layered air defenses, vast industrial depth, and a habit of striking at will. With Western weapons often hedged by political restrictions, Kyiv leaned into a homegrown solution: fly farther, hit cheaper, and adapt faster than the enemy. That mindset birthed a defense tech ecosystem so prolific that even foreign observers now call it a Silicon Valley of defense. In one covert factory, the soundtrack wasn't the whine of jet turbines. It was rock music over speakers while rows of airframes waited for final assembly. The company inside that factory, Firepoint, scaled from a few dozen drones a month to roughly 100 a day, each a long-range, deep-strike platform costing about $55,000 and credited by company officials with the majority of deep hits inside Russia: arms depots, refineries, the soft tissue of a war machine that assumed distance was armor. Those drones, the FP-1s, range out to around 1,600 kilometers with a 60-kilogram payload. They're deliberately unspectacular to look at. More science project than showroom piece. And that's the point. Strip out the glitter, keep the performance. So when Firepoint started talking publicly about a different creature entirely, a 3,000-kilometer cruise missile with a warhead measured not in tens, but in over 1,000 kilograms, it felt like a beat drop in Ukraine's whole defense track. The nickname Flamingo stuck. The specs stuck harder. Company leaders briefed media that the missile could carry roughly 1,150 kilograms, with claimed accuracy on the order of approximately 14 meters at max range. That's the difference between somewhere on the refinery grounds and the exact pumping hall that turns oil into money. Let's zoom in. The Flamingo, also referred to as FP5 in some reporting, emerged publicly alongside a string of factory floor disclosures. Production already underway at about 1 missile per day, with a ramp goal to several per day within weeks. Ukrainian sources and independent defense press echoed the core numbers: greater than 3,000-kilometer reach, approximately 1,150-kilogram warhead, and production accelerating as tooling and supply chains stabilize. President Volodymyr Zelensky has framed mass production as a national imperative, pairing it with a wider policy pivot: roughly $10 billion annual government purchases from domestic arms makers, with ambitions to triple that through allied orders. Translated, industrial muscle is now part of the front line. How big is a 1,150-kilogram warhead? Think of the explosive heart of a classic American bunker buster, or the heaviest conventional bombs you've seen in archived news footage. The Flamingo's punch, on paper, exceeds the publicly listed warhead mass for many Western long-range cruise missiles that people casually compare it to. That doesn't make it better across the board. Guidance suites, mission planning, and survivability matter just as much, but it does make it a different tool. If you want to break machinery, crater runways, detonate fuel fields, shatter transformers, or collapse sections of bridge, mass matters. And if you can deliver that mass from beyond 3,000 kilometers, you've effectively erased most of European Russia's strategic depth. Now, about that name. According to Ukrainian sources, the early mistake with the paint tint led engineers to joke that they'd built a giant pink bird. The bird fought back by going very fast and very far. The nickname never left. Somewhere, a branding consultant just lost their wings. None of this arrived in a vacuum. Ukraine's long-range game has been a years-long duel. Russian S-300s, S-400s, and Panzer batteries positioned to counter big targets, while Ukrainian planners learned to etch their way through with small signatures, clever routing, and sheer volume. That's why the FP-1 drones had impact. They sneak. A 6-meter wingspan cruise missile is sneakier than a bomber but louder than a hobby drone. So why field Flamingo now? Because 3 years of combat have mapped the radar seams and the timelines. Planners know when a sector is thin, which radar goes down for maintenance, where a mobile SAM parks at night. The first time Ukraine shows the Flamingo's teeth, expect it to chew a soft, high-value target in a relatively under-defended sector for the cameras. Proof of concept meets public diplomacy, then the real work starts. Night after night of pressure that forces Russia to choose between guarding refineries, guarding rail choke points, guarding air bases, or guarding the replacement transformers they'll need after last night. Production is the quiet co-star. Firepoint executives told reporters from inside their covert sites that Ukraine's defense industry isn't a wartime side project anymore. It's the plan. Factories are dispersed, often blended into civilian grids, and feed a procurement system that has learned to buy agility as much as steel. When a Western off-the-shelf navigation kit got jammed, one firm built its own software stack and kept flying. No months-long contracting cycle, no committee. That speed is now bolting into the Flamingo line. The initial cadence, about 1 a day, sounds modest until you remember what one successful hit can do to an oil complex or an airbase. Turning that 1 into 7 per day is the difference between remember that strike and the refinery network is out of rhythm and the airports are dark on Tuesdays. How does the Flamingo fly? Details are understandably thin, but open reporting and company claims point to a low-flying, terrain-hopping profile with resilient navigation, GNSS-aided, inertial backup, hardened against Russian electronic warfare. The essence is familiar. Hug the Earth, spoof the seekers, hide in ground clutter, and arrive with enough precision that the warhead mass does the rest. That 14-meter claim? It's company-side and public version, but even if real accuracy varies by conditions, combat footage tends to answer those debates fast. And Ukraine says it already has a list of saved targets waiting for this exact tool. If you're an air defense officer, you've just been assigned a new full-time hobby. So, does Flamingo change everything? Not in the Marvel movie sense where one gadget ends the war next week, but it does bend the arc. Russia's war machine has relied on strategic depth, big distances, abundant rail, and dispersed industry to absorb damage and keep firing. A ground-launched cruise missile that reaches nearly anywhere European Russia cares about doesn't just add a new strike option, it rewrites calculus. Refineries, power nodes, fixed radar, munitions plants, aircraft overhaul depots, a 50 AWACS home bases, long-range SAM regiments, the logistics knots that feed the front, suddenly they're inside the envelope of a missile built to arrive heavy. When depth becomes distance on paper, planning changes on both sides. Quick detour for perspective, and a tiny joke so the editors don't replace me with AI. In Western hands, long-range cruise missiles are like Swiss watches. Gorgeous, precise, expensive, and you're terrified to drop them. Ukraine's approach is more like a rugged field watch. Tell time, don't die, keep going. If the Flamingo is priced and produced the way its makers suggest, Kyiv may be able to do something the Kremlin never expected. Run a nightly industrial-scale pressure campaign at ranges Russians used to call safe, and nothing ruins a general's schedule like scheduling repairs. Context matters. In the last 24 hours alone, Ukraine's leadership touted the Flamingo's trials while Russia launched one of the war's heaviest air raids, hundreds of Shahed-type drones and dozens of missiles, hitting, among other things, an American-owned facility in western Ukraine. Kyiv called it a message. Moscow called it a success. The rest of us call it a reminder that this war punishes hesitation. The Flamingo announcement landed in the same news cycle for a reason. Ukraine is signaling capability and intent. The other side will read the signal. And yes, the politics swirl around all of this. Western leaders debate red lines and permissions. Ukrainian officials talk openly about exporting security. If they can keep building, they can keep fighting. Meanwhile, a woman who was an architect 2 years ago now runs production for a company shaping the air war. That's not a movie pitch, that's Tuesday. The pink bird is real. The question is what happens when it takes flight for keeps. Let's start with a war planner's whiteboard. On the left, targets that change outcomes. On the right, what keeps them safe. The Flamingo threatens to erase the gap between the two. Target set 1, the energy spine. Refineries, gas processing plants, compressor stations, and export terminals are the bloodstream of Russia's wartime economy. Over the past year, Ukrainian long-range drones already found their way to oil facilities hundreds of kilometers from the front line, forcing shutdowns and reroutes. Now imagine swapping a 60-kilogram drone warhead for 1,150 kilograms of high explosive placed within a few paces of catalytic cracking units, pump halls, or key manifolds. One hit doesn't end oil production. It ends the week at that plant and cascades through supply chains. Repeat that across a network and you convert cash into crater. That is the cost imposition logic at Flamingo's core. Target set 2, the rail heart. Russia moves a war by rail. Ammunition, armor, fuel, spares, bridges over key rivers, marshalling yards with switch arrays, locomotive depots. These aren't just steel and timetables, they're tempo. Most are hard to protect 24/7 with high-end SAMs, and even when protected, they're sprawling, target-rich environments. A 3,000-kilometer missile lets Ukraine schedule pain on the rail network whenever air defense rotations thin. Target set 3, air. Long-range SAM regiments, S-400 sites, are the lungs of Russia's layered air defense. Some are mobile, many live semi-fixed lives with radar fences, generators, and munition stacks that hate shrapnel. Air bases shelter the aircraft and crews that generate glide bomb barrages. Hit the munitions and fuel fields, and you mute tomorrow's sortie rate. These are not new ideas, but Flamingo puts all of them within reach without asking a bomber to go sightseeing. How do you get a big cruise missile through a thick air defense? You don't send it alone. Ukraine has spent 2 years teaching Russia a cruel math lesson. A $55,000 drone can force a $1 million intercept and still reveal a radar's habits. Stack that with decoy drones, electronic spoofers, and cyber distractions, and you can pry open windows in the radar picture. In that window, the Flamingo slips by, low and late. This is the combined arms of the air, and Ukraine has been rehearsing it every night from Kharkiv to Kursk. The Flamingo gives that rehearsal a new soloist. What about guidance and survivability? Public numbers always wear camouflage, but company reps and Ukrainian media have stressed hardened navigation and EW resilience. If the missile can ride GNSS with inertial backup and survive the jamming fields saturating Belgorod to Bryansk, accuracy lands in the zone that matters. Remember, a refinery isn't a pickup truck. A run of sub-20-meter miss distance on a target the size of a city block is an engineer's smile. That said, even the best kit can have bad days. Terrain masking, weather, spoofing, last-second seekers, many variables decide a mission. The takeaway isn't invincibility, it's affordability at scale. If Ukraine can build Flamingos fast enough, it can treat them like a campaign, not a headline. Let's talk production, because strategy lives or dies on spreadsheets. The AP's factory floor access showed a domestic industry that's shock-tested by war and increasingly vertically integrated. Composites here, electronics there, final assembly somewhere else entirely. Firepoint's leaders publicly described a ramp, from about 1 Flamingo per day to a target several times that, while Ukrainian officials pitched a national procurement plan at roughly $10 billion a year, with the capacity to sell multiples of that to Europe. If even a fraction of the promised cadence materializes, you're looking at monthly outputs that move from experimental to strategic. That is the word to remember. Strategic. What changes on Russia's side? Air defense is about priorities. You can blanket a capital, you can ring an airbase, you can protect the refineries that fund the war, you can armor the rail that feeds the guns. You cannot do all of it everywhere. Flamingo stretches that problem until something breaks. Expect Russia to pull SAMs inward, harden some nodes with more concrete and camouflage, flood likely corridors with jammers, and add decoy infrastructure. Expect relocation of high-value maintenance and munition sites farther east. Expect more aggressive fighter patrols over key sectors. And expect a propaganda blitz to dismiss early Flamingo kills as minor incidents until the repair crews clock the overtime. That adaptation is real. It will down some missiles. But every destroyed intercept missile, every deployed radar shifted from the front to the rear, is capacity no longer terrifying troops in Kharkiv. Strategic depth meet strategic debt. Where does Europe fit? If you're sitting in a European capital, Flamingo is more than a Ukrainian weapon. It's a proof that continental security can be manufactured at speed. A domestic missile that reaches Murmansk or Novorossiysk without leaving Ukrainian soil tells planners in Warsaw, Berlin, and Paris that the old monopoly on long-range conventional precision has cracked. That doesn't mean open export tomorrow. It does mean collaboration, licensing, or at least shared supply chains are on the table in a future where Europe wants options that don't require a transatlantic permission slip. Somewhere a procurement officer just spilled their coffee and said, absolutely not. And somewhere else their boss said, tell me more. Now, the politics. In the same week Flamingo broke cover, the war's news ticker filled with a huge Russian aerial strike, hundreds of drones plus dozens of missiles, and a hit on an American-owned factory in western Ukraine that injured civilians and sent a loud message. Ukrainian leadership used the moment to argue, again, that deterrence now lives in domestic production. Western discourse across Atlantic capitals and campaign trails danced around red lines, ceasefires, and offense versus defense, while Kyiv quietly showcased the device that ignores semantic debates. If you can't give us permission to strike back with your kit, the subtext goes, we'll build our own. Risks, plenty. Supply chains are living organisms in wartime. Engines, guidance units, explosives, precursors. Each is a choke point Russia will try to stress with cyber attacks, sabotage, and strategic strikes. Factories dispersed among civilian grids carry moral and practical hazards, and every high-profile success invites the enemy's full attention. There's also the legal, diplomatic, and escalation ladder. Deep strikes that crater energy infrastructure far from the front can trigger new rounds of pressure on Kyiv from partners who fear spirals. None of this argues against Flamingo. It argues for careful targeteering and messaging. Hit the military-industrial arteries, the rail choke points feeding the front, the air bases launching daily death. Make every strike legible to allies and lethal to logistics. That's how you build political armor around a pink-named missile. A quick, grounded comparison so we don't drift into comic book territory. Western long-range cruise missiles have decades of refinement, imaging seekers, complex mid-course updates, libraries that let warheads recognize a specific building face. Flamingo's virtue is different, range plus mass at a price and pace that a country at war can sustain. One is a scalpel wielded by a surgeon, the other is a sledgehammer swung by a marathoner. Both change walls. Flamingo's claim of approximately 14-meter accuracy suggests the hammer isn't exactly wild either. If it consistently lands within a bus length of critical machinery, that machinery stops paying taxes to the war. Operationally, picture a night. 10 FP-1s go first, sniffing out radar activations and forcing interceptors to launch. A second wave of decoys and EW drones muddies the screen. Minutes later, 2 Flamingos pop over a low ridge and drag their shadows across a refinery fence. Somewhere in a control room, alarms light up. Somewhere else, a Russian air defense officer watches his last ready interceptor leave the rail. 30 seconds later, a catwalk and 3 transformers are no longer part of the electrical grid. In the morning, satellite photos appear. The debate about whether this changes everything gets one more data point. Will Russia hit back harder? It already is, and it will keep trying. But there is a difference between punishment that terrorizes and punishment that degrades. Degrading means fewer glide bombs tomorrow, fewer replacement barrels next week, fewer working refineries fueling the month. That is what sustained Flamingo use can do, turn resolve into repair bills. And repair bills have a vote in war. Final thought, and then I'll let the pink bird rest its legs. Weapons don't win wars. Strategies do. The Flamingo is a tool for a strategy Ukraine has been refining in plain sight. Trade space for speed, trade stealth for scale, and turn the enemy's distance into a liability instead of a shield. It's smart, it's ugly beautiful, and, sorry, I promise this is the last bird joke. It's ready to stand on one leg if that's what the mission needs.
Would like to take notes.
If you're watching this in a command post east of the Dnipro, you've just gained a new respect for lawn ornaments. This missile won't end the war alone, but it will change it by forcing Russia to protect what it thought was untouchable, by giving Ukraine an industrial lever it can actually pull, and by reminding everyone that ingenuity multiplied by production is a weapon all its own. The era of the pink bird has begun,